Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 2025 Nemo Talk series. I'm Suzanne Sanger, Executive Director of the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association, and I'm joining the Zoom room today from Chequelt in Gibsons at Howe Sound on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Squamish Nation. The SCCA, together with our program partner Rhizome Up Media, is thrilled to bring you the 6th annual Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival. This year's events have been made possible through the generous support of the District of Seashell, BC Government, Ocean Week Canada, the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, and numerous local NGOs, businesses, and individual donors. We are very, very grateful to all our supporters whose contributions enable us to offer all of the festival events and activities free of charge to everyone who wants to participate. A little bit about the SCCA. We are a charitable nonprofit society with a mission to protect and restore biodiversity on the Sunshine Coast. We work across a region that is more than 2 million hectares of lands and waters from Howe Sound to Hamathko in the territories of the Squamish, the Shishak, Tl'amin, Klahoose, and Hamalko First Nations. The SCCA is deeply committed to reconciliation and respect for the rights and title of First Nations in their territories. We draw deep inspiration from the profound connection, the reverence, the care, and the long knowledge and understanding that Indigenous cultures have always held for and applied to their stewardship of the lands, the waters, and all of the species in their territories. A little bit about World Oceans Day and the inspiration behind the Oceans Festival is the United Nations Calls to Action. In 1992, the United Nations designated June 8th as World Oceans Day in order to raise awareness of human impacts on our oceans and to build a global movement for ocean protection. Every year, worldwide, people come together to share, learn, and celebrate and advocate for the health of our oceans. We are very honored to host the Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival as part of this growing global effort. This year's festival is rich in content with in-person and online screenings of thought-provoking films, both features and short films, interactive citizen science and educational activities, advocacy initiatives, and of course, our fantastic Nemo Talk series. Our goal with all of this is to inspire, engage, and connect people and to encourage meaningful, real action to protect and restore the oceans we so love and depend on. Today, for our second Nemo Talk in this year's series, we're going to be hearing from Adam Taylor of the Marine Life Sanctuary Society on glass sponge reefs and rockfish conservation in a7tsem Howe Sound. We're very excited to have Adam with us today. He is a marine conservationist, diver, filmmaker, and educator. Born and raised, I think, on Bowen Island, he is the president of the Marine Life Sanctuary Society. MLSS is a grassroots nonprofit dedicated to marine education, stewardship, and the protection of BC's coastal ecosystems. An avid diver since age 14, Adam brings a deep personal connection to the underwater world and a passion for marine conservation. Through his work at Marine Life Sanctuary Society, he leads community science initiatives focused on the health of glass sponge reefs and rockfish populations in Howe Sound. His work encompasses underwater research, long-term monitoring, public education, and advocacy aimed at advancing marine protected areas and promoting species recovery. Adam, I'm going to invite you to share your screen, introduce yourself, and start your talk now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I just got to get the right screen shared. There it is. Can you see it? Oops. Are you getting a screen? Now.
Now it's there.
Awesome. Okay. Let me. Okay, are we good to go?
Yep.
Okay. thank you, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Adam Taylor. I am joining you from my home on Naqueliquim, Bowen Island. I just want to talk today about Marine Life Sanctuary Society and the wonderful glass sponge reefs and connections to rockfish in Howe Sound. Give an overview of some of our programs, as well as how you may be able to help with a new program that we've been working on called Reef Watchers, which is a combination of education and outreach and reporting to DFO enforcement, trying to improve the overall success of these protected areas that seem to be targeted by illegal fishing. So I will jump right in right now. So MLSS is a registered charity focusing on marine conservation, as has already been mentioned. Sorry, I'm minor technical hiccup. There we go. Volunteer based, and we now have 2 very part-time staff, which is great because we've received some funding, and as we expand programs, we definitely need more than just pure volunteer based organization. And the society was founded over 30 years ago by Andy Lamb and Bernie Hanby, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with those names. Sorry, I've got plastic on this one. This is their coffee table book that they spent 25 years creating. They're quite well known in the conservation circles, as well as marine education. So the organization's first major success was partnering with other NGO and the District of West Vancouver to create the first air quote marine protected area at Whitecliff Park in 1993. And I'm using air quotes because it's not technically a marine protected area. It's annually renewable fishing closures. And 30 years later, our friends at DFO still have not created a public facing map of the closure, which makes it hard for fishermen to understand that it's there. But as you will note throughout the talk, I may make some somewhat disparaging or disappointed comments about DFO. It's about the organization and the bureaucracy, not the individual staff members, who I greatly enjoy working alongside on various projects. They truly care. It's just the bureaucracy itself is rather thick, and sometimes progress is not as fast as many of us on the conservation side of things would like to see. So we were involved in the creation of the Rockfish conservation areas in Howe Sound. And more recently, through the great work of past President Glenn Dennison, the organization discovered, documented, and lobbied for protection of the majority of the glass sponge reefs found in Howe Sound. Currently, we had slowed down through COVID for obvious reasons, but we did manage to secure some funding to expand our monitoring programs and take over some of the citizen science-led programs that Oceanwise / Vancouver Aquarium formerly ran, but had been canceled during COVID, and that section of the organization was disbanded. So, being in a position to provide volunteer divers, as well as collecting data for ongoing review of local marine protected areas, was a no-brainer for us. So that's sort of where our current focus is, which is scuba-based volunteer monitoring, as well as education and outreach. And of those education and outreach, because we have limited resources, we chose to focus recently on school education as opposed to community group education. So we've been hosting beach interpretation events where scuba divers collect ocean creatures, bring them up to the shoreline for biologist interpreters to help the students learn more about the ocean, both with Capilano University as well as with Squamish Nation's elementary schools. One from Cap Little Ones in West Vancouver, and the other Satmas Elementary from Squamish. So I think it's best if I start with the concept of shifting baselines to put everyone on the same page as far as how marine conservation can be challenging and how people's view of the ocean will change over time, but it's the changes are masked through the passage of time. So the basic concept was developed by Dr. Daniel Pauly out of UBC's fisheries lab. And it's that each generation considers what you grew up with or what you studied in school as normal. So if something's changed from what you first saw to now, that's definitely a change, but it's masking the changes that occurred prior to that. So it totally masks the long-term change. And while there have been positive shifts in Howe Sound with the cleanup of industry, with the pulp mills, with the chemical plant in Squamish shutting down, Britannia Mine being cleaned up, it's fabulous that we see a resurgence of bait fish, herring, anchovy. We have a lot more marine mammals. People are excited about that. But what's happening deep below the surface isn't as visible, and it's not as rosy as you see with all the whales and stuff like that. So to put things in perspective, I thought I would share some family history and get an understanding of sort of how I came to be so passionate about rockfish, glass sponge reefs, and conservation. This grumpy looking gentleman here is my great grandfather, Jacob Dorman. He was a steam engineer who worked for the railroad. The family came out building the railroad. They were in Vancouver for the Great Fire of 1885, lost everything. 5 years later, they decided they want a fresh start, and they homesteaded on Bowen Island. So tales from those time periods in the 1880s, 1890s, there was not much industry on Bowen. There was logging and, stump farming. And one of the local families, not my family, but they tell the stories because it's humorous, would supplement their income by creating fish oil for lubricants for the logging camps. They would row out a 200 hook long line into the bay, tie it off on shore, and pick it up the next day with, very close to 200 fish on it. Completely indiscriminate. Any type of fish, rockfish, lingcod, mud shark, etc. And they would render the fish down into oil for lubricants. Well, they could never eat that many fish, so they started throwing it on their garden as compost. And lo and behold, 5-6 months later, they had a awkward conversation with their main client in Vancouver and Gastown, who they supplied groceries and produce to, and they lost their contract because the customers at the inn were complaining that the potatoes tasted fishy. So again, I share this to show the change in attitude over time towards the ocean. Generally speaking, the ocean is there for us to take from in the settler approach to the world, and that's ancient history, 1800s, but it doesn't improve that much into modern times. In the 1940s, my father would tell stories of huge rockfish being pulled out of Dorman Bay in front of the old homestead. Massive yellow eye rockfish that would be 100 years old and very slow to reproduce. Essentially, yellow eye rockfish don't start reproducing till they're 18, and they will live to almost 120 years. In the 1960s through the 80s, with the advent of scuba gear, there was a lot of spear fishing. It became the macho thing to do. So many species, especially rockfish and lingcod, were prime targets. The 70s and 80s were also a heyday for recreational salmon fishing and bottom fishing. There's stories of the Sun Salmon Derby with the boats, so many boats in the water, you could almost walk across the inlet. Into the 1990s, there was a significant decline and basic collapse of recreational fishing. And I grew up fishing off the rocks out in front of the house. That was my passion as a child. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't much to do. We didn't even have cable vision on Bowen. So the outdoors was my playground. And I grew up with all these past family stories, and I never ever saw yellow eye or other fish. And in the 2000s, things have started to get a little bit better. But my family, the seventh generation of Jacob Dorman's descendants, literally just moved off the island for greener pastures. But in my family's time in Howe Sound, the ocean has not been well managed. And I share 7 generations as it's an important concept within First Nations culture to think about the future, think about leaving things better for the descendants. And it's something I think government could take notice of, and we could definitely do better than we have for the past 7 generations. Here's a screenshot from the Ocean Watch Howe Sound report, and it shows a typical day in the Strait of Georgia for a commercial fisherman in the 1930s. Many of these species don't even exist anymore, locally. Like halibut, I don't know the last time I heard of anyone catching a halibut locally. But anyway, it is a shame how much has been lost through the greed of humans. Because unfortunately, as much as people like to think the ocean is endless, the species within it are not. So moving forward, the connection between rockfish and sponge reefs come from family stories at Dorman Bay. This is on Bowen Island across from White Cliff Park, just south of the ferry terminal. And during a review of Bowen for a potential national park, I was on a committee and asking the Parks Canada, are you considering ocean areas? And they're like, we are, but we don't know any information. So I pulled together people to come have a look at things, one of whom being Glenn Dennison, who, while he came into the bay to look for the mythical rockfish hole in the middle of the bay that it features in family and other people's fishing stories, he discovered a sponge reef right off the point. And it was quite exciting. It took us quite some time to get out there and actually dive the site. But when we finally did, within sight of the marker line that we put on the top of the reef were 4 yellow eye rockfish, which really excited me, including this one here who appears pregnant, because in my first 20 years of scuba diving, actively searching for yellow eye rockfish because I'd heard so many stories growing up, and in visiting sites shared by researchers, I had only encountered 5 yellow eye within 20 years, and that they were all associated with sponge on rock. But suddenly seeing 4 adults, including a pregnant one, within sight at the same location, it made me suddenly realize that perhaps these sponge reefs should be studied a little bit more, and perhaps they are something special that needs our protection. So, sharing a little bit more Bowen history photos. This is Snug Cove. That's the Lady Alexandra. It's probably 1930s. And I share this because the sponge reef in question is just off screen around the corner to the right. But if you look at Dorman Point now compared to what it looks like in this photo, which was logging scar, then a burned out area from a forest fire, it's fully recovered. It's part of it was part of the Union Steamships Resort, and then now it's part of Crippen Regional Park. And it looks like old growth forest. It's second growth, but it's a big, healthy, forested point. Everyone looks at it, they love it. But I share this because we don't have the same appreciation for what's occurring under the waves. So just around the corner, there is a habitat type that predates and coexisted with the dinosaurs, that is home for yellow eye rockfish that I mentioned, that could have been born the day that this photo was taken. Theoretically, there still could be a yellow eye born when this photo was taken around the corner in that sponge reef or in the rocky reef. So I'll quickly skip through this one because it doesn't always play properly. When I say that fishing was part of who I am and the ocean is part of who I am, this was the beach out front. We learned at an early age to fish off the rocks and so on. And I share this often, especially if I'm talking to a yacht club or fishermen, to show that I started out as a fisherman, as a harvester, recreationally. And it was the seeing how things disappeared over time and the knowing that somebody needed to step up. It became a passion of mine to try to connect the researchers and the volunteers with the government people who can make changes to things. So I'm just going to try to skip. There we go. And again, part of the challenge with these conversations or advancing marine conservation areas is fishing is a multi-generational activity. And you can see from these photos that even, into my dad's old age, we were taking him out on fishing charters out of Ucluelet because he wanted to relive his youth. It's tough to tell someone that a pastime that they learned from their favorite uncle or their grandfather or something is no longer acceptable if it's species that are endangered, or oh, we always did that, there's always been fish, there'll be more. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The ocean is not unlimited, and we do need to do better. So this ties in the rockfish to the glass sponge reefs, and I think a quick overview of what they are will help advance the conversation. So they're actually an animal, and they're a stationary filter feeding organism. They live on the bottom. They are home to many different species, and their main role is as a filter feeder is to remove microbes and whatnot from the water. And essentially they're like almost like the lungs of the ocean. They're pulling material out. They're not adding oxygen back, but they're converting nutrients and putting it back up into the water column. And they are incredibly slow growing, estimates between 2 and 10 centimeters a year. And their primary matrix is silica spicules, which is why they're known as glass sponge. And in a minute, I'll show you a microscope slide of what they look like. And the key here is they do have reef forming abilities, and those spicules provide the structure for the reefs to build up on. So it's not like calcium carbonate in coral reefs. It's the silica that remains behind in the sediment to create enough stability for the sponges to sit on top of the mound. So here is a Hectate, which is the building block of glass sponge, and that's about the thickness of a human hair. And they form these amazing scaffolding matrices to be able to adjust the shape and type of the way the sponge looks based on the current. And they are found back in, this is actually incorrect, it should be about 35-40 million years ago. And the fossil records all the way back to 500-550 million years ago, but they coexisted and predated the dinosaurs. And one reef structure stretched 2,800 kilometers, fossilized remains stretched 2,800 kilometers through southern Europe from Portugal to Romania. So to be clear, sponge reefs are rare. Glass sponges themselves are not that rare. They're found throughout the world's temperate waters, and typically in what's known as a sponge garden. And here's a very prolific one that used to exist at Anderson Bay on Texada Island. Unfortunately, most of these sponges got ripped off the wall by prawn trap lines. And so the difference between this image, which is sponge growing on rock, and a sponge bioherm or sponge reef, is the fact that the sponges have essentially covered over all of the bottom, and they keep growing up, and the sediment fills in between the sponges, and they keep growing higher and higher and higher above the bottom to keep doing their thing. So this is a cross section from DFO showing the basics. So the gray area is the bioherm mound, which is generations and generations of dead sponge spicules. And the sponges that are currently alive are sitting on the top almost like an iceberg, where there's maybe 10-20% of the sponge is still in the mud, the rest of it's dissolved, but everything above it is alive and busy doing their little thing, filtering water and providing home for an amazing assortment of creatures. Here is a red stripe rockfish in sponge reef. Again, the brown areas at the bottom are dead. The creams and the whites are the living portions. And here's a typical section on the top of a reef showing the mound of the silica infused mud as well as the live sponge. And for some reason it does not. Oh, there we go. Gone through much of this already. Sponge reefs themselves had been thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs until they were rediscovered off of Haida Gwaii in 1987 by Geological Survey of Canada. And at the time, the newspaper articles compared it to finding a herd of dinosaurs. But as things happen with the ocean, it's out of sight, out of mind, and the excitement soon died off. More recently, there's been discoveries throughout the Strait of Georgia and Howe Sound. And there's heavily damaged remnants in many inlets, the entrance to many inlets and fjords in BC. So from a conservation standpoint, the bigger conversation started in 2014 when Fisheries and Oceans were looking at closing the discoveries that they made in the Strait of Georgia and 2 of them in Howe Sound. And at that time, Glenn had already discovered a larger number of sponge reefs, but due to the bureaucracy and the process, these weren't on the table for discussion for protection. And as such, we approached the province of BC because DFO would not commit to when they would come back to the table. So given that there was a sponge reef adjacent to Hectate Provincial Park, we were successful in having the park expanded. So the province expanded the park on the seabed, and it brought a new management partner into the conversation, which is good because over time, the province is more involved in talking about sponge reef issues, including potential zoning changes to the seabed for all of the changes that DFO is proposing for protected areas, which is very, very positive. As I said, it took us a couple of years to convince the province to expand, which was blazingly fast when it comes to bureaucracy. And unfortunately, a decade later, we're still trying to get our proposed management plan approved. But the good thing is the park was expanded. We have a new partner in the province, and it's all positive. So where things get confusing is the protected areas. This map looks a little confusing, and if you're a fisherman, you would probably shake your head. But the dashed areas or the shaded areas with the purple are the rockfish conservation areas. The red areas with the dark red surround is the first generation of glass sponge closures, as well as the second generation of glass sponge closures, which were the ones based on Glenn Dennison's work. And there's different rules for each closure. The original DFO closures prohibited bottom contact fishing, such as prawn and crab trap, and bottom fishing like jigging for cod and stuff like that. They do allow for trolling for salmon, as well as trawling with downriggers. Unfortunately, they do allow for the downriggers in the shallower reefs that were getting hit by downriggers and getting destroyed. So DFO did amend the second closure to prohibit downrigger use. So you can still trawl through the area to fish for salmon, but you cannot have a downrigger on it because not everyone has accurate electronics on their boat. And 5-pound lead cannonball and a steel line slicing through those sponges is quite catastrophic, and we've lost the majority of the Hectate sponge reef from this activity alone. The yellow areas are the newer closures that were announced in 2022. They have all of the closures prohibitions mentioned earlier, with the exception of indigenous harvests, because DFO has not completed their consultation with First Nations, but it is anticipated that they would have all the same protections. So the whole process of getting sponge reefs discovered and protected was all citizen science, self-funded, started with the mapping. As Glenn would find a suspected target, he would put a drop camera down, something he made in his spare time out of plumbing pipe and a cheap camera he bought off of eBay. If it was shallow enough, we would do dive surveys and collect photos and videos. There was a period where we were doing technical dives down to 250, 300 feet to document these reefs. We've since stopped those for safety reasons. There were a series of temperature monitors on these sites, as well as a couple projects with UBC Engineering and Environmental Sciences a great partnership with aquatic submarines while they were around. And the temperature monitoring in particular was important because glass sponges do not do well over 10 degrees Celsius, and spikes in temperatures were causing mortality in the shallower sponge reefs. And to this day, they are still, there are warm water events that are killing off the shallowest of the sponges. But considering the majority of sponge reefs are in the 250 to 350 depth range, I don't think we have to worry as much about temperature change for the deeper ones, but the shallower reefs are being impacted, and in my opinion, should be heavily studied, because if these reefs have survived 5 global extinction events and they're still kicking in a time of climate change, we may want to, understand what makes them work and how they recover, because it could be an important conversation. Here's Glenn over top of Hectate Bioherb. And I was remiss in not mentioning, I may be the person people see and talk to about this, but we have dozens and dozens of volunteers who come out in the snow to do training, are out regularly. We have about 50 volunteer divers that have been active for the last couple of years, and it's very rewarding to see so many people wanting to participate and help out. I'll skip through these pretty quick because they're not as relevant, but while Aquatica submarines were still operational, we had some great opportunities to go explore and document some of these sponge reefs. And it's quite amazing to be sitting warm and dry and to be able to have a conversation visiting sites that either are too deep to dive on, or you've dove on them, but instead of being able to be just sending hand signals, actually have a conversation with your dive buddy or a researcher about what you're seeing and so on. Moving on, part of the challenge and one of the reasons I would like doing these talks is we're looking for allies, both individuals and organizations. So we've got the 3 generations of sponge reef closures. There's existing rockfish conservation areas, as well as protection at Porto Cove and White Cliff Park. And again, I'm putting this in quotes because neither one of those are accurately represented. Neither Porto Cove or White Cliff are accurately represented on fishing regulation maps. There's ongoing infractions. Even last week when I was out doing education events with Squamish Nation elementary schools, I witnessed over 3 days, probably 5 recreational infractions and 1 commercial infraction within the park. And that's just not acceptable. So to further confuse the conservation conversation, lingcod and rockfish have been closed for all of Howe Sound starting in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So the presence of rockfish conservation areas on the map implies that the other areas are fishable for rockfish when in fact they're still closed. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on messaging and education. And despite all these protections and area-wide protection, the data and the monitoring data is showing that there's not a recovery. So 20 years of protection and no recovery, it's not a great sign, and it's likely due to ongoing poaching. Some of it on purpose, some of it is accidental. People just don't know better. But as a condition of a fishing license, you need to understand the rules for the area in which you're fishing. So trying to move this quickly to wrap up. This Venn diagram shows what's prohibited in rockfish conservation areas, what's prohibited in glass sponge reef areas. And fortunately, DFO has recognized that it's a challenge to understand and it's confusing. So they're proposing marine refuges, which would combine the 2 set types of closures and provide a more comprehensive protection for the species that exist within the proposed closures. And again, why do we care whether we're a diver or a local resident, fisherman or conservation leaning person? These sponge reefs are incredibly ancient. The sponge reefs are going back 300 million years in the fossil records. They definitely act as a nursery. We see a lot of smaller rockfish. We're seeing a lot of pregnant rockfish, as well as their prey. They're incredibly delicate. We have developed specialized scuba training to ensure that our volunteers are not accidentally causing damage to the area that we're trying to protect. But you drop an anchor, which is currently allowed anywhere, there's no regulation against it, or you put prawn trap down, you'll be destroying an ancient habitat that will take decades to recover. They filter massive quantities of water. They are susceptible to the temperature change, so I think they should be studied more as an indicator of climate change. And they act as a carbon sink. They're so busy feeding and filtering water and removing little microbes and whatnot that they actually sequester carbon at an equivalent rate to old growth forest. So these sponges are 1 to 2 meters tall. Old growth forest is 30 meters tall. They are just little factories sitting on the bottom doing their thing. And the fact that there are reefs that occur within recreational scuba depths means it's easier for scientists to study. You don't need an ocean-going vessel. You don't need a huge submersible or $10,000 a day boat. You can get out with just a boat you can trailer and qualified scuba divers. And to tie back into the earlier comments about First Nations, First Nation territory is mountaintop to ocean bottom. And I think sponge reefs sort of are a great example of this, in that the silica in these sponge reefs could potentially be coming from the mountains, in the valleys, eroding the silica in the volcanic rock, and down the rivers into the ocean and eventually into the sponge reefs themselves. So there is significant bottom contact fishing damage occurring. This is Hectate Sponge Reef. I do need to get back and do a proper video survey of it. Unfortunately, the last 5 attempts, I've been out of the water for health reasons, but I'm back in now. But the last 5 attempts by our team could not match the same route I usually take doing my surveys, because the sponges are so destroyed they can't orient where they are on the reef. I'll try to wrap up quickly here. The map on the screen right now is the current conversation with Fisheries and Oceans as potential changes to align or combine rockfish and glass sponge closures. It's a very positive development. It's not all roses. There are portions of existing closures they're proposing to remove to create fishing opportunities to make up for the areas where, for example, at Passage Island, there's 4 different sponge closures and 2 different glass sponge reef closures. Sorry, 2 different RCAs, Rockfish Conservation Areas. They're proposing making it one singular closure with all things protected other than upper water column for minor trawling. That's a positive change, but they want to open up the northern end closer to White Cliff Park and Bird Islet, which is not necessarily positive because it'll be more fishing pressure in good rockfish habitat. So I'm going to blast through what we're doing science monitoring and skip to questions. So we are monitoring Howe Sound only at the moment, just because of limited resources. We have rockfish monitoring and lingcod egg mass monitoring. It's important because rockfish are very long-lived and slow to reach sexual maturity. I mentioned previously yellow eye rockfish that live to 118. This is a copper rockfish that lives to 65. 2 other rockfish in our area are listed by COSEWIC, one being quillback, and it's listed as a threatened species. They live to 85 years. So when you see rockfish on the menu, often it's a fish that could be as old as you are. So they are incredibly tasty, and I admit I have eaten them, and I used to catch them regularly in my youth. But the key difference between rockfish and other species, such as salmon, is they reproduce throughout their entire life. And once they reach sexual maturity, they start reproducing annually. But the larger the fish, the larger the body mass, the larger the number of larvae they produce, and the higher quality because they got more fat content, et cetera, et cetera. And the key with trying to create protected areas for older, larger fish is a smaller fish that just started reproducing may drop 10,000, 20,000 young over 1 or 2 evenings. Whereas a larger fish that's, many decades old, 50, 60, 100 years old, would be producing hundreds of thousands, if not a million larvae, and it would take up to 2 weeks for all of them to be born. So you have the variable water conditions over 2 weeks to increase the likelihood of survival versus 2 days. So if, for example, the conditions aren't perfect, the larvae may not survive. And because of their very long life cycle, it's kind of a boom and bust when it comes to reproduction. There may be very few small fish recruited year after year after year, and 1 or 2 decades later, suddenly there's thousands of them. And that makes it incredibly hard to manage the fishery and manage recovery because it's such a hit and miss. Conditions have to be just perfect. We are also doing lingcod egg mass monitoring. This is an egg mass in the bottom underneath that boulder there. And the rockfish monitoring that I mentioned, and another picture of a boatload of volunteers, smiley, happy, getting out and doing good work. We are mostly based out of Horseshoe Bay because most of our volunteers are in the Lower Mainland, but we have brought a few people over from the Sunshine Coast to participate. And if there was enough divers over there, we'd be happy to set up something from that side or come pick people up. Lastly, something that might appeal to the non-divers, whether you're a boater or a shore-based observer, is a local stewardship initiative named Reef Watchers, which, as the photo shows, this is a pilot project from Dorman Bay. This is the red area on the left is the closure for this glass sponge reef. The image to the right was a view from my old family home of where the closure is as it's viewed from that location. So we would put a boat on each corner, take photos, overlay the photos, and then provide that to the homeowner with a summary of what the closure is, what the rules are, and how to report to DFO's observe, record, report line. And we're in the process of talking to a few yacht clubs about doing educational talks to their members and then getting out on the water, marking out a closure at a set day and time, having a Zoom or a Google call in process. So shore-based observers can be at their favorite park viewpoint, their own home, etc., and take photos of where the closures are from their own viewing location, email it into MLSS. We then put it on a single page sheet, a PDF that you can print, put on your fridge or have on your phone. So you know where the closure is as viewed from your location and how and what to report. And I think basically I'm going to wrap up quickly. We're looking for partners from yacht clubs, conservation clubs. And to be clear, this is not an enforcement program. It's a reporting to enforcement. We don't want people to approach fishermen. Sometimes they get angry. Sometimes they're armed. It's a informed reporting. And I think I'll just leave it. Oh, this is not acting up, or it's acting up on me, sorry. Lastly, we have a conservation vessel under a full refit from Hull Up. We should be done in 2 months, and we have ongoing fundraising if anyone is so inclined. But other than that, we'll jump over to questions.
Adam, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen. And originally when we were setting up, you had mentioned that you had some videos you might want to share, and I didn't take you up on it. And I think maybe we should do that. I'd love for everybody to be able to see some of the videos you've got. What do you think?
I can share one if you want and put it in the background while we talk.
Yeah, that would be, I think that'd be great.
I'm just going to pause it for a second and move it so I can see the screen.
Thank you.
And I need to share screen again. Where's that button?
You've just, I know your video is epic. I've seen it before and I felt like.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you see the beginning of a video?
Yep, I can.
So this, believe it or not, is only 85 feet deep. It is in Howe Sound. And everything you see in this video right now lives at least 45 years.
Wow. Amazing.
And these are videos that I tend not to share publicly because it will paint a target on these reefs. They're already targeted by poachers because you put it on a map as a protected area. People think that's where the fish are. That's where they go to fish. And
Right.
yeah, it's sad that I can't share this far and wide because they're truly amazing ecosystems and they do need protection because they are a little oasis of life on the bottom. But I'll find something else to put on and then we can keep on chatting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to see it. A big part of the Ocean Festival is helping people who aren't divers and community members who, don't get down into the water to be able to see things, to help them connect with that, to really see for yourself what's under there. So I really appreciate you showing that. And this map that you've got up, that was actually one of the big questions, or the sort of a big takeaway for me all this time, is that it's so clear with the mapping that you guys have been able to put together how the rock or the glass sponge reefs are amazing habitat for the rockfish and for these old species of fish that they don't have other spaces really left because of all the damage that's been done elsewhere. So they're hiding out in the reefs and they're breeding in the reefs, and that's hugely important on so many levels.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I had was, what are some of the other species that live together with the rockfish and the lingcod and in the reefs?
There is a lot of squat lobster. There's a lot of small eulid shrimp and whatnot. Now, is this video still running or did it pause? Because I started a second one.
It's beautiful. It's still running. It's showing those gorgeous.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And the big challenge is spot prawn and shrimp love to come and live around the perimeter of these reefs and then move out and feed. So what has happened in the past is prawn fishermen recognize that there's a lot of prawns there, so they'll be dropping the traps along the edges of the sponge, but often the trap lines will cross into or through the sponge reefs, and then that contact damage essentially crushes them. Not only do they get crushed, but the sediment kicked up from the trap activity, whether it's the trap or the lines dragging across the bottom, puts up a sediment plume which chokes out the sponges. So they'll automatically stop feeding if they're going to be sucking in mud, and then they'll wait half an hour, they'll try again, and then if it's still silty, they won't feed. So over time, not only are sponge reefs getting damaged and destroyed physically, they're slowly getting choked out by sedimentation. And you combine that with rising water temperature, and you're creating a challenging environment for these sponge species to thrive. And they are an important oasis. There are a significantly larger number of species found within the sponge reef as opposed to surrounding areas. But because sponges are so successful at what they're doing, unless it's something that eats sponge, lives on or in sponge, or eats something that lives on or eats sponges, there's fewer types of species, but in higher abundance. This is actually sea whips, which are growing in a patch of bare sponge, dead sponge reef by Quum Defense Islands up in northern Howe Sound, across from Porto Cove. Those were octocorals, actually, cold water corals.
Wow, very cool.
Sorry, any other questions? Sorry, Suzanne?
Yeah, Billy's got her hand up.
Okay, hi there, Adam. Listen, I just am so appreciative, as I'm sure we are all are, of the work that you're doing to create to try to herd the cats to get the protected areas in order. I'm just wanted to just tell you how thankful and appreciative we all are. It's I first heard about the glass sponges back in, I guess it was about 2015 or 16, when CPAWS did a presentation at the Heritage Playhouse in Gibsons. And at that time, there were fishermen there who were trying to find out where they were so that they could not fish it. And I think I'm just, still recognizing that the huge battle that you're facing here is trying to get DFO and everyone else organized to not only proclaim these protected areas, but tell everybody about them. So anyway, I'm just a little in awe of all you're doing and just wanted to give you my appreciation about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a challenge in that it's such an amazing ecosystem and it's so delicate that we want to shout it far and wide, but we have to be selective on what we share because it paints a target on it. And we have shared some of our videos recently. One set with Fisheries and Oceans for a TV segment they're doing with a fishing show in some of the Vancouver Canucks to talk about why sponge reefs should be protected. But you can imagine how many hours it took me to go through my footage and only share ones with no fish or very few fish showing because I don't want a fishing show, showcasing that earlier footage of 5 species of rockfish in sight at the same time. So it's a challenge. We're slowly making progress, but unfortunately, there's so many people out there that don't care or don't understand the rules that they are actually using the closures as a roadmap on where to poach. So that's why we really need local stewards doing accurate reporting and us lobbying the government to create a better enforcement mechanism because it's not working. And whether it's the government doing more or perhaps funding Squamish Nation to create their own monitoring and enforcement program, I don't know what the answer is other than what we're doing right now is not working.
Yeah.
So,
Well, listen, we've shared the link to your to the society on the web page with the Nemo talk. So that's the best place to contact you about getting in touch about
exactly.
citizen
Exactly.
science, etc. Great.
Correct. And
Okay.
there's
Good.
opportunities for people who are certified divers. There's opportunities for people who want to be a shore-based observer. If you know someone who's a commercial skipper, when we get our boat in the water, we'll be looking for volunteer skippers and our paid skippers. It only needs a SVOP, doesn't need a big 60-ton ticket or anything like that. But there are ways for people to get involved, and it's that the old saying, it takes a village. It will take many people to make this successful, and I'm just one of many people who are helping, but I'm the one that tends to do these talks. So know that there's dozens and dozens of others that are supporting me and doing stuff. And if you or any of your friends may be interested, reach out and we can talk about what opportunities exist. And it's especially important that we get a broader volunteer base out of the Sunshine Coast, because while we do dive and do monitoring on that side of the sound, it is a bit further of a boat ride for most of our volunteers. That's more fuel, more questions about weather and so on. So the more people who help, the better things will be.
Yeah, it sounds like what you need is a small dedicated group of divers and shoreline reef watchers on the Sunshine Coast.
Exactly. And we have had conversations with Gibson's Yacht Club. It's just challenging given timing and the fact that we're volunteer and they're volunteer. So
Yep.
there has been some interest expressed to have some of the boats from the yacht club come out and mark the perimeter of some of these closures, which then would tie well with, with Sunshine Coast Conservation Association, talking to their members. I've spoken with Gambier Conservation Association for the same thing. Whereas
Yep.
we can get the shore-based people observing at the same day that the yacht club people are out, we can have a more informed network of community observers.
Right.
And
This,
from
yeah.
experience, observing the poaching and calling them out on it, they move on. They don't stop. They just move to different spots where there's less people with eyes on. So if it becomes public knowledge among the fishing community that there's community groups watching closures X, Y, and Z, I'm hopeful that the fishing pressures for those locations will be lowered, and
Yeah.
slowly over time, other areas will realize that perhaps they want to participate or help educate the boating and fishing community. And again, I don't want to paint everyone with the broad brush. There's many people who do care that go out of their way to avoid these areas, but there's still way too many who don't know or pretend they don't know.
Right. And does the Squamish Nation have, because we're talking about Squamish Nation territory and Howe Sound, do they have a guardians program or something of the like where they're starting to, do any kind of monitoring / enforcement reporting?
At the moment for the ocean, no. They do some work with the rivers and streams, and they have expressed interest, but as with any First Nation, especially one that's, partially urban, they're constantly being faced with thousands of proposals and requests and whatnot for the limited time. My understanding is now that they have a new manager for their marine use plan, that they will be looking into the concept, but at the end of the day, it's time and money and manpower. And we are open and willing to work with them and have their members come out on our boat while we're doing monitoring so they can get sea time. So we're hopeful that something will change, because DFO, with respect to the individual staff, the program just does not work for what they're trying to do.
Right. And them too. I guess everybody's over capacity with all of the things mounting. And you made this comment earlier about how like glass sponge reefs are like our old growth forests. And I was really thinking a lot about that when you were talking, Adam. And the fact that like in a climate era with so much work for them to do and so many other factors, affecting them the same way that climate change affects the old growth forest. Like if they get smashed or lost, we might never get them back.
Yeah, it's one of the programs we're trying to work on is finding partners both from research and funding to look at restoration techniques. We have done in the past a larval settlement study, trying to see if it's possible to collect larval sponge to transplant within a damaged reef or from one healthier reef to another damaged reef. But these things take time and a lot of effort. But to put it in perspective, the reef off of Grace Islet, so within the turn radius of the Langdale Ferry, leaving from the Sunshine Coast side, is estimated to be 85% intact. And that doesn't necessarily mean 85% alive, but standing sponge structure, showing significant damage. Likewise, on the east side of Anvil Island, there's another reef that's 85% intact. They're the exception. The Strait of Georgia reefs don't peak over 45% intact. And the reef that would be closest to the southern end of Sunshine Coast, or correction, Seashell, would be Halibut Bank. That's estimated to be 0.8% intact because of the decades and decades of bottom trawling, prawn trap, downriggers, you name it. Yet, coincidentally, there's still a lot of humpback whale activity there. Likewise, anecdotally, I've noted longer feeding dives over sponge aggregations around sponge reefs. Is it because of the upwelling that's already occurring that they're going there anyway, or do the sponges and the sponge feeding and nutrient cycling have something to do with that conversation? I don't know, but I'll sure be having conversations with DFO's whale acoustic unit to see if they can start, maybe tweaking where they put their arrays to see if there's a link between sponge reefs and humpback, because everyone loves the big charismatic animals that you see on the surface. They don't know enough to care about these areas that are really important down in the depths.
Yeah, we really heard that with our presentation yesterday and today. It's become a bit of a theme for this year's series, is the depths and how the depths upwell and create all this abundance further up. So I just want to check in with anybody who's still here and make sure if anyone's got a question, please raise your hand or type it in the chat. We've got Adam said he could hang around a little bit longer. We are a little bit over time, but okay. I guess that's it for now. I guess before we let you go, Adam, I wanted to say, it's the work that you're doing is so crucial. And, not just for, all of the really like the real biodiversity outcomes and the conservation outcomes, but also just in terms of, the world is experiencing a lot of difficult things right now, and the work that you do is very hopeful in showing us the beauty of what's under there, and helping us to engage and take action, and help protect what we don't want to lose. And so, just before we go, I want to finish my thought, and then we'll go back to a question from Leanne. And the thought is just, I really want to encourage everyone who's watching and listening, that we just heard Adam say that the Grace Islets are 85% intact, and those are on our side by Langdale. And maybe
Yeah.
that's a place where we could encourage some focus, bringing it back to what you said, where if people are watching, it's very much discouraging the fishers to come and poach in those places. And so, I just want to sort of put the challenge out to our folks on the Sunshine Coast that maybe we can champion for the Grace Islets. And we'll follow up with Adam and folks who are interested after this. And just going
Excellent.
back, yeah, and going back to Leanne's question is, when do we start talking about closing all of Howe Sound?
I think, especially on the bottom contact fishing question, I think now is the time to start the conversation. It might slightly derail the conversation about combining the rockfish and glass sponge closures, which is a good first step. Part of the challenge is always going to be voters. Actually, before I say that, if you look at this footage right now, all these shiner perch, that's what you'd see around docks in the shallows. And that's where they typically live, in the shallows, eating plankton. And we're finding them year round at depth. They're only there because there's plankton to eat. So if is that plankton that they're eating there because of the upwelling the sponges are eating, or the sponges contributing to the food web? And you're not supposed to see these smaller fish down at depths year round. They only hide down in the depths in the winter. So it's really, I'm just sharing that to say there's more to these reefs than we understand yet. And when you see how prolific the life is, we really should be caring. Anyway, back to your question. You want to re-summarize that? I got distracted by all the fishies.
No, it's beautiful. Leanne said, when do we start talking about closing all of Howe Sound?
Okay, so the challenge is going to be all the people who love to fish. And there's nothing wrong with fishing done right. But there's a lot more people who fish for salmon or throw out a crab or a prawn trap than there are who care about closing things. So, for example, even provincial politicians get hit up by their constituents about, hey, how come this area is closed or that? So, for example, the past MLA for Howe Sound, Sea to Sky, on the east side, Jordan Sturdy, was very supportive of the Hectate Park expansion of protecting glass sponge reefs, and learned a bit about them. Yet for years afterwards, when I dropped by his office in Horseshoe Bay when I was waiting for a ferry, he'd say, oh, are those sponge closures at Defense Island really needed? I've heard from like 10 or more of my constituents about that was their only spot they could salmon fish, and why is it closed? And they never hit the bottom. And the difference is you've got dozens and dozens of voters who want to continue fishing versus a somewhat disorganized group of conservation-minded people that may not be as loud as the others. Add to the fact that it's a multi-generational activity, and it's something that someone wants to be able to pass on to their kids or their grandkids. It's a difficult conversation to have. But considering all of Howe Sound has been closed to lingcod and rockfish for 20 years, and there's nothing else really large on the bottom to catch, perhaps where we start is saying no bottom contact fishing and no downriggers over the sponge reefs that are shallower. And if you want to fish with a hook and line, you need to be moving forward. And that would simplify conservation, because if you see someone sitting in the water with their line in, that's illegal. If they're moving forward, it's legal. That might be an easier pill to swallow than saying no fishing of any form. Because I hate to say it, I don't think we'll ever see a no fishing of any form for all of Howe Sound. It's just too much of a hot potato politically.
Yeah, and it's cultural too.
Yeah.
Something that occurs to me through this conversation, that we love our UNESCO biosphere designation. These are, basically like, I would say, artifacts, like globally significant heritage species on this planet.
Yep.
And so, I wonder about, and also like archaeologically, right? Like thinking back to how long they've been here. I wonder if there's some way to pursue, some kind of, I don't know, heritage status for the reefs themselves and surrounding areas.
That would be amazing, and it's something we've considered, but as with all these conversations, I am one person, our board is 6 people. You know what it's like. There's
Yeah.
always some champions and some doers, and a lot of people who support, but unless there's a equivalent amount of funding support through the government and or private donors, it's really tough to advance these conversations because we only have so much time, especially on the volunteer front. But more importantly, the mid-level and junior staff tend to get rotated out of DFO to other departments or other projects. And I don't know if it's accidentally on purpose or not, but it's very hard to gain traction because once you get a good working relationship and you've brought someone up to speed on the knowledge that your organization may have, they get reassigned. So it's challenging. So as we progress on this, I think we need a group of conservation groups to band together and have a bigger voice and say, we truly believe this is important and we want to see these the following changes. But unless we can band together as a group of organizations, one nonprofit here and one nonprofit there and a couple passionate individuals, they won't make the difference. But I think if we continue to approach both the local and regional government, First Nations, not just DFO, but the province, because with the coastal marine strategy, they're talking about nearshore habitats. We need a multi-pronged approach because it's very easy for one government to change their mind. But if we got 2 or 3 or 4 levels of government involved, it's less easy for them to completely drop protections.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sarama made a comment, and then we're gonna wrap this up. But I want to end with this comment in part because it's core to our Ocean Festival programming as well. He says there have been films, but what we really need is a David Attenborough stature documentary on glass sponge reefs to make an essential difference. I feel like a big part of what we're doing here is showing people what they can't see, and then bringing in folks like you to really help us understand, what the values are and why they're so important and how at risk they are. But it is, like you said, elevating it to that level of stature and the consciousness of, people who can really support. And, what Sarama's touching on is that when you can communicate this in such a, in a big way, you will draw that support politically and socially and from funders. And so I feel like there may be a beautiful matching coming here too, because as you know, Saram is a filmmaker and a diver. And so Adam, I just want to say thank you so much for all the amazing work you and the Marine Life Sanctuary Society are doing. And and coming back to this, the volunteerism, like the amount of time and energy and commitment that people like you and your team put in without benefiting in some way it's beautiful, it's admirable, it's not very sustainable, but it is, it just, I want to make sure that how much we value that. It's so important.
And I make sure to always pass on to our volunteers and when we do talks internally that people are happy to know that other people care, but that they have an opportunity to be part of the solution versus part of the problem. So it won't change overnight, but if we don't care and if we don't share, it won't get better on its own. We can't rely on the government. We know that. So I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm, and please reach out through the website. And when we do arrange an actual day to do marking the perimeter of a closure, we will be reaching out to both Sunshine Coast and Gambier Conservancies because it takes a village. We need the local residents to be aware of what's happening and to help be part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. I'm going to just do a little bit of wind up here and promote the festival. So huge, just like a round of applause for Adam and all the Marine Life Sanctuary Society's work. Please go to our website and check out the page on the Nemo Talk that describes their projects. All the links will be there. If there's something new that popped up now, we'll make sure and put all that information on the website page. Our next Nemo Talk coming up tomorrow is we've got Diane Sanford coming to talk to us about eelgrass, forage fish, and us, the humans. And this is about the vital role of eelgrass meadows and forage fish and how important they are to the coastal food web, as well as how local citizen science and shoreline stewardship can support the recovery of some of these ecosystems, and how what we do on the land affects them. And then of course, in turn affects everything else that Adam was just talking about. This year, we've got so much going on this festival, folks, that I'm not going to read the whole list, but we've got in-person events, citizen science, shoreline cleanups, amazing short films and feature films, and then the two big things that the SCCA is doing for events. Tomorrow is Wednesday, June 4th. We've got a live film screening of Chasing Coral at 7 p.m. in Seashelt at the Sunshine Coast Arts Center. So we really hope folks will come to that. We had a beautiful film screening to launch the festival on Sunday of Turtle Walker. It was so amazing, and the conversation that comes out of these screenings, it's really wonderful to bring community together and hear from everybody about how they feel about what the amazing work that people are doing to track and do the science and conservation. So it's really worth coming in person. And then of course we wind up the festival next Sunday, June 8th, on World Oceans Day with our World Oceans Day celebration. And it's a jam-packed day with music and booths, and I think Adam's coming, and we've got interactive activities and a barbecue, and it's just a really lovely celebration of the ocean. Just another shout out to our funders and sponsors and volunteers who work so hard to put the festival together. Our Oceans Festival Working Group, Billy and Sully and Sophie and Allison and Robin. Thank you. And always just want to end on the massive shout out to Billy Carroll, who is our program coordinator, and just all the work that Billy does. She's a driving force behind the festival program, and we could not do any of this without her. So thank you to everybody for all the good work you do, and we'll see you tomorrow at the next Nemo Talk.
Thank you.